Today on Dr. Jam's Jam, we'll be talking about the concept of carbon debt and explaining why it doesn't exist in sustainably managed forests. It's a pretty controversial topic, but one that is premised on a basic misunderstanding of forest management. I hope you'll join me. Let's jam. You may have heard about carbon debt. It's the concept that when we harvest trees and use them for bioenergy or other forest products, that it can take a long time, decades, for trees to grow back and store the same amount of carbon that was removed. That makes sense if you're only looking at the area that was harvested, known in forestry as a stand. Trees absolutely do take time to grow. Over time, the amount of carbon stored in the stand goes up as trees grow and down as trees are removed. This is true whether you are removing a few or most of the trees. The thing is, we don't manage forests by stands of a few acres. We manage forests across a landscape. The landscape is composed of many forest stands. For example, in Canada, we harvest around 0.3% of the timber in any single year. That means we don't harvest 99.7%. And those trees are growing. As long as the growth of the 99.7% is the same or more than the removals from the 0.3% we did harvest, there is no loss of forest carbon in that year, and there is no carbon debt. So it all comes down to the scale. You know that old expression of not seeing the forest for the trees? Anyone claiming the existence of forest carbon debt in a sustainably managed forest is taking too small a focus and not looking at the big picture. A sustainably managed forest should, by definition, have no trend of carbon losses. So when we look at the greenhouse gas inventory, the annual carbon losses and gains in a forest, we have to look across the whole forest and not just the greenhouse gas balance for a couple of acres. It is as much about the remaining trees and their growth over the year as the ones that are harvested in that year, or the carbon lost to wildfires and mortality. Now, people say there is a climate crisis and that we can't afford to let any carbon into the atmosphere. It is true that the greenhouse gas targets established by many nations are very aggressive. Net zero by 2050. My home of Canada is no exception. But the reality is forest ecosystems don't care about human dates and deadlines. Trees are living organisms, and if they are not growing, they are dying. Life is not static. If we stop harvesting trees for a few years, sure, there may be a slight temporary boost in the carbon balance and stored carbon, but eventually stands start collapsing due to old age or insect infestation, or in some ecosystems, wildfires will release most of the carbon. This is accelerated in a warming climate. For example, this year, 2023, the carbon release from wildfire in Canada's forests is more than double all the fossil fuel and industrial emissions of the country. As the old saying goes, use it or lose it. Forest management requires multi-decade or even multi-century thinking, which is why some of the most sustainably managed forests in places like Europe have been in the same family for many generations. Halting timber harvest for a few years only delays the eventual release of carbon back into the atmosphere, while we continue to use fossil fuels and add CO2 to the biosphere. So, while it is totally true that harvesting timber for bioenergy results in a near-term reduction in the stored carbon in a forest stand, it is important to remember the geographic scale and the time period over which we manage forests. Once these are considered, it is clear that carbon debt does not exist for sustainably managed forests. See the forest, and don't let the individual trees get in the way of your vision. If you want more information about forest carbon accounting, I suggest checking out the Dr. Jam's Jam videos on thinking about forest carbon like financial statements. They are incredibly exciting. Keep on jamming.